Hi, I am going to read Becoming Psychic by Jeff Tarrant. Alright. And then I'm going to start with the foreword, which is on page 9. So, ever since I was a child, I was aware that I had a way of seeing people and energy and information that was not the norm. I would see people in colors, feel what they were feeling, and at times know information about things I couldn't logically have known. Things that happened in a person's past would happen in the future. Or names and information about loved ones close to them who had crossed to the other side.
Hello!
Hi. As I grew older, the materialistic paradigm that we are raised with As I grew older, the materialistic paradigm we are raised with issued a judgment on me. I had to either be diluted. Come here, Blake. Come here. Stop. Okay, goodbye. Goodbye. Oh my god. Ever since I was a child, I was aware that I had a way of seeing people and energy and information that was not the norm. I would see people in colors, feel what they were feeling, and at times know information about things I couldn't logically have known. Things that had happened in a person's past would happen in the future. Or names and information about loved ones close to them would cross to the other side.
Yeah.
As I grew older, the materialistic paradigm that we are raised with issued a judgment on me. I had to either be diluted. I had to dilute myself into believing that I could see things I couldn't, or a fraud, because there was no way this could be real. Only it was real. I knew I wasn't delusional or a fraud. I was raised by 2 teachers who taught me to be a critical thinker. And a critical thinker doesn't just accept what someone else states as truth and then close their mind. A critical thinker goes on a journey of discovery and seeks the truth. And so I did. My journey led me first to see a psychiatrist, to whom I confessed that at times I would hear voices speaking to me. I explained that it was an internal hearing, not an external sound or voice. And I told him that these voices would tell me things. What kind of things do they tell you, Laura? The psychiatrist asked, narrowing his gaze at me. But what the voices would tell me were never scary. They would be someone's grandmother telling me that they were happy about the new baby in the family, family's arrival, who was named after them, or that the person I was talking to about to get a wonderful new job. The world is full of more things than we can possibly imagine, he told me. He assured me that I was not crazy or delusional. It sounds like the information you are getting is healing and beautiful, he said. Carry on. Ronnie, can you please turn that down? My path of discovery next led me to a world of science to try to bridge the gap between the information I was getting and what we know of conscious. Hi. Come here. Consciousness. Of energy, both seen and unseen. I was interested in finding out how I was able to easily access this information while other people seemingly could not. I knew that if I could do it, others must have this ability as well. Perhaps there was even a way they could learn to access it and use it as a tool to help guide them in their highest and best paths in life. And then the universe cued in Dr. Jeff Tarrant. I first met Dr. Tarrant in 2013 at a Forever Family Foundation, the FFF, conference in San Diego, California. The Forever Family Foundation is a nonprofit dedicated to helping people in grief. It was founded by Bob and Fran Ginsberg after their daughter Bailey died. The Ginsbergs started having signs and communications from Bailey, showing them that she was still present and loving them, just in a new way. So they founded this organization to help people whose loved ones had passed by connecting them with a medium, an individual who can connect with consciousness of those no longer in the physical body. They were careful to ensure the integrity of the program by implementing strict protocols and doing blinded tests on mediums to make sure that they were proficient using them, thus eliminating any chance of fraud. Mediums had to pass their test in order to volunteer. I passed the test in 2005, and I have been a volunteer ever since. Dr. Tarrant was attending the Forever Family Foundation conference as a presenter when I met him. He had studied and mapped the brainwave activity of one of the Forever Family Foundation certified mediums. Janet Meyer was presenting his unique findings. One thing led to another, and before I knew it, I was hooked up to an EEG, having my brainwaves studied by Dr. Tarrant. This was the first of a number of occasions where he would gather data on what my brain was doing during normal talking mode, as well as when I went to a physical or a psychic and mediumistic mode. Come here, Lane. Come here.
Sit down.
Oh my gosh. Where are we at? Dr. Tarrant was able to help map my brainwave activity. It showed that I was seeing something in my left field of vision, something that was registering in my brain, but that no one else could see. Conversely, when I switched over to reading mediumistically, which is on the right side of the screen, the EEG once again revealed that I was now seeing something in the left field of vision, even though nothing appeared in the room. Dr. Tarrant's research was able to show that what I was saying I was seeing on the screen was reflected by my brainwave activity. Now, how does this pertain to you? The data shows that certain parts of our brains are used when tuning in physical and mediumistically, and that we can learn how to train our brains and access this information. Dr. Tarrant, with his EEG machines, has been able to look inside the brains of psychic mediums and see exactly what we are doing. He has found characteristic similarities, and he will share what he has found with you in this book. What's more, you will come away with an understanding of exactly how to train your brain waves to more fully access these parts of yourself. The results can be life-changing, both in seemingly small ways, like getting to parking spots easily, to much larger ones, like knowing what job offer to accept or if you should move. Becoming psychic can shift your life in positive and beautiful ways. So get ready, you're about to go on an amazing adventure through these pages, a journey that will give you an understanding of your own. And that was by Laura Lynn Jackson. And she's a New York Times bestselling author of Signs and The Light Between Us. Oh my gosh, she wrote Signs? No way. Hold on, I gotta look that up. I think for now I'm gonna skip the prologue from skeptic to believer because I'm not a skeptic, but I might come back to it. So we're at chapter 1. It's called Channeling Shamans. In 2013, my exposure to people with extraordinary abilities was virtually non-existent. But that was about to change. At the time, I was working at the University of Missouri as a health psychologist in the Student Health Center. In this position, I was largely responsible for developing a campus-wide... Hey, sit down, please. Sit down. Sit down. A campus-wide stress management biofeedback program. After about a year of piloting this program, we received a nice-sized grant that allowed us to purchase biofeedback software and sensors for all the computer labs on campus. The grant also allowed me to hire 2 undergraduate students to assist in the program. Enter Kelsey and Matt. Wait, go lay down. Go lay down. I met them about a year ago, before when they attended one of our early biofeedback courses. They're motivated and quick learners, so I was excited to make them part of the team. During their tenure with our program, I saw them several times a week and got to know them quite well. At the end of their appointment, they were both graduating and getting ready to move into the next phases of their lives. At a farewell thank you dinner, Matt announced that he wanted to tell us about his mother. He seemed nervous and cautious, and I absolutely had no idea what was coming next. Why was he acting so weird? I felt like he was getting ready to tell me something, some bad news, and I was bracing myself. Matt proceeded to tell us a long and complicated story about his mother, Janet Meyer. Apparently, she began spontaneously speaking South American tribal languages several years before this conversation. After participating in the holotropic breathwork session, what a relief. Not bad news after all. Wait, what? Spontaneously speaking South American tribal languages after participating in holotropic breathwork? I can see why he'd be cautious about sharing this news. This sounded a little bit crazy. Apparently, he waited an entire year to tell me about this because he wanted to make sure I would be open to his story. I guess I passed the test. Holotropic breathwork. If you're not familiar with it, it's also pronounced HB. It's a deep dive and rapid breathing technique that is used in combination with, hi baby, with Evo active music to induce an altered state of consciousness. Typically, the breath is done with a partner in a group setting. One person acts as a sitter, and is there anything the breather might need during a session? Help getting to the bathroom, Kleenex, a blanket. The breather inhales deeply through the nose and lets all the air out through their mouth, repeating this with no pauses and at somewhat a quickening pace. You keep this breathing going on for an hour or more. Typically, after 20 to 30 minutes, consciousness shifts into a full-blown psychedelic state.
It's going like this in my ear.
That's not very nice. Typically, after 20 to 30 minutes, consciousness shifts into a full-blown psychedelic state. This state is enhanced by the setting created by facilitators and the sounds and energy of other people in the room. Having participated in a few of these myself, I've seen people writhing on the floor, crying, yelling, curling in a ball, and laughing hysterically. Not at the same time, of course. The experience often results in a release of emotions tied to previous hurts and traumas, or realizations about oneself that can be used for personal growth. For the most people, it is a powerful and intense process. Matt explained that his mother attended 2 of these workshops with her sister Debbie. The first session was typical. Janet had some insights about herself and felt completely at rest in a state of bliss after her turn being the breather. Months later, when they returned for a second workshop, in the middle of her turn as the breather, Janet sat upright and began speaking. Stop spitting, please. Janet sat upright and began speaking an unknown language. At least it sounded like a language, but nothing she had ever heard before. Aside from 1 year of high school Spanish, Janet had never studied any other language besides English, and had never been out of the United States, and had no idea what she was saying, if anything. These words were just flowing out of her. After a holotropic breathwork session ended, Titan, come here, please. Come here. Titan. After the holotropic breathwork session ended, yay! Janet went home.
Mama.
Oh, high five.
That's it.
Janet went home excited and a little scared about what happened. She began slowly telling her family and friends about the experience and quickly found out that she could still access this ability. Simply by shifting her awareness, she could turn it on, and the languages would just pour out of her. In fact, at the beginning, the languages sometimes seemed to have a mind of their own, spontaneously erupting without an invitation. What's up? No. Eventually, Janet learned how to control the languages, allowing them to come through only when she could. Yay! Of course, at this point, she wasn't even certain that this was a language. It felt like a language, but nobody seemed to recognize it. It was possible that she was just making up sounds that gave the appearance of a language. It turns out that there are at least a few well-known conditions in which people begin spontaneously speaking another language, or what sounds like a language. Glossolalia is the practice of speaking in tongues that occurs in certain Pentecostal and or charismatic Christian churches. With glossolalia, what is spoken is not recognized as a language, and there's generally not any interest or attempt at translating what is said. Instead, this practice is typically... What, baby? Okay, so Mario has an A in it, so it's M-A. If Janet was speaking a language, yay! High five. She had no idea what she was saying, so it was not functional in the same way as other reported cases. So what is happening? Since the process began, Janet had been recording herself during these language experiences and sending the tapes to professors and researchers from all over the United States. While many of the experts were polite, they had no idea how to help. Other times, Janet would receive a response suggesting that she was psychotic or suggesting that she was glossolalia and simply gibberish. Being tenacious, she kept at it, and after 4 years of searching, eventually found someone who was willing to and able to translate these languages. The late Dr. Bernardo, I don't know how to pronounce his last name, an anthropologist at the Smithsonian Institution in Shaman, was originally from the... Who was originally from the tribe in northern Brazil, where he was known as... I'm not going to even try to pronounce that, I apologize. He recognized something in Janet's language and indicated that she was speaking Yanomami, a South American tribal language. This was the confirmation that Janet had been looking for. Even though she didn't know what she was saying, she always felt that there was a meaning behind the sounds, that they weren't just nonsense. When her exact words were translated, they generally took the form of prayers and teachings related to honoring Mother Earth. Over time, Ipu translated several tapes and reported that Janet was also sometimes speaking several other South American tribal dialects, including Fulnio, Tucano, and Panamari. All of this information taken together suggested that Janet was somehow channeling several people, beings, or entities.
Me.
Okay. Scoot over, babe.
Me.
I was fascinated by this story and wasted no time in contacting Matt's mom, Janet. We spoke on the phone, and she was very open about her ability, but also somewhat reserved, waiting to see if I would judge her or attempt to write off her experiences as something it wasn't. For my part, it was trying to be open about what she described, but the scientist in me couldn't help wondering if there wasn't some other more reasonable explanation. As much as Janet appeared sincere, the idea of channeling South American shamans did seem a bit far out. Aside from my own curiosity, it was probably Janet's authenticity that nudged me toward pursuing the study. Oh, sit down, baby. Janet was clear from the beginning that she wanted to understand what was happening to her. In fact, while she felt strongly that these experiences were meaningful and real, she was also open to and interested in any scientific understanding of the process. Could we learn anything from measuring her brain while she was speaking these languages? This could provide tangible evidence to support her experience. I learned that Janet lived in St. Louis, less than 2 miles from my father, and less than 2 hours from my location at the time. We agreed on a date and time and set up our first of many meetings. My first impression of Janet was that she seemed very normal, whatever that is. She lived in a cute suburban house that stood out in no way from her neighbors. The interior of her home and the way she was dressed suggested nothing unusual. I'm not sure what I expected, probably more stereotypical eccentricities, but there were none. No flowing robes or excessive jewelry, no burning candles, and no incense. Stop it! Move it. Move. You can play with toys. Okay? At our first meeting, Janet's husband, Carl, and her son, Matt, which is my lab assistant, were both present. Everyone seemed very excited about what we were doing and wanted to be involved. As much as I liked Carl and Matt, they were not helpful. They had lots of ideas and suggestions, maybe too many, and inadvertently created some additional pressure for Janet. Most of our other meetings took place at my home office. In addition to channeling shamans, Janet is also a medium and psychic, which gave us a lot to explore. Before beginning any of our experiments, we always started with the baseline EEG.
Look, my baby. Oh, man.
This is simply an EEG recording obtained while the person is sitting there doing nothing. It is important to record this data to determine how the brain changes during the state of consciousness, because we were primarily interested in what was happening when the languages were coming through. It was also important to do a baseline recording while Janet was speaking English. In fact, as more evidence that Janet was very normal in most ways, when asked to talk about anything at all, she immediately began talking about the new countertops they were getting for their kitchen. She wasn't talking about angels or ascended masters or crystals. She was just talking about updating her kitchen. For the baseline recording, we compared Janet's brainwaves to a normative database. Basically, we looked at Janet's brain activity in eyes open and eyes closed conditions. Translate the squiggly lines of the raw EEG pattern into specific brainwaves. Delta, theta, alpha, and beta. And then calculate how much of these were present. This data can be compared to... Okay, can you sit down, please? This data can be compared to a group of controlled subjects that represent average segment of the population for different age brackets. This allowed us to make direct comparison and determine if someone has patterns of brainwave activity that are abnormal or atypical in some way. Before going further, it might be helpful to provide a simplified explanation of what brainwaves are and how they relate to state of consciousness. To begin, every cell in our body uses electricity and chemicals to communicate with other cells. This electricity exists in a range of frequencies that are measured by how many repetitions there are in a second lifetime. Fast brain waves have many repetitions, while slow brain waves may only have a few. Ooh. So it gives a probably backwards right now in the camera. Let's see if it focuses. Well, this one's gamma 31 to 100 hertz. Insight, peak, focus, expanded consciousness. This one's beta 16 to 30 hertz. Alterness, concentration, cognition. I guess if you want me to go into this more, I will. I just don't want this to be too long. These repetitions are defined by the number of cycles per second, which is CPS, referred to as hertz. Each cycle per second is 1 hertz. Researchers typically put these frequencies into little groups or clusters called EEG bands to simplify the information. These EEG bands are defined by a range of frequencies and given Greek letters as names: delta, theta, alpha, etc. In general, the frequencies that live together in these clusters tend to have similar influence on consciousness. Below is a simplified description of most common EEG bands and their most common associations. And like I said, we can get into that on a different time. Maybe I'll do some writing about it. I say that this is simplification because we actually produce all of these brain waves everywhere, all of the time. In addition to the speed of brain waves, it is also important to consider how much of each of these brain waves. Ronan, you okay?
No, someone's chasing me over.
It is also important to consider how much of each of the brain waves are present in each moment. The power or amplitude of EEG signal is measured in microvolts. The more microvolts, the more power. So what is really important in this relative amount of each of the brain waves? When the proportion of brain waves becomes skewed toward one another, when the proportion of the brainwaves becomes skewed toward one or another brainwave, that leads to a shift in consciousness. For example, when there is a large amount of delta, we are probably asleep. When there's a large amount of alpha, we're probably in our heads with our eyes closed. The fact that we can attach numbers to the squiggly lines of an EEG is super helpful and is referred to as a quantitative EEG. When we can determine how much of each brainwave there is, we can start comparing one person's brainwave patterns to other groups of people, mapping patterns associated with certain mental health concerns, and examining various states of consciousness, including meditation, psychedelic states, or psychic states. Compared to a normative database, Janet showed a relative imbalance in her brainwaves favoring theta activity. There was also a hot spot of beta and a high beta in the left and right frontal regions. However, this was likely a result. Okay. This was likely a result of muscle tension and should not be interpreted. The maps below reflect how the amount of each brain wave observed compared to what is expected. Any shades in the middle of the scale are in the average range. As the area gets darker, black, this indicates that there are more activity in the particular EEG band location compared to average. As an area shifts to lighter shades, this indicates less activity than expected. And then here's the diagram. Alright. The increased theta activity is located in the frontal lobes, which is interesting as this tends to be somewhat typical patterns seen in ADHD. This does not mean that Janet has ADHD, but what it does suggest is that some of the expected functions of the frontal lobe may have behaving may be behaving in a less than efficient or expected manner. One of the primary roles of the frontal lobes is inhibition, the ability to monitor yourself and stop yourself from saying or doing certain things. This is one reason this pattern is often associated with ADHD. Folks with this diagnosis often struggle with impulsivity. Kids with ADHD might blur out their thoughts or get out their seat in school without even considering asking for permission. But having access frontal lobe theta might not all be bad. It is possible that Janet's baseline brainwave patterns help her access these languages because the brain may be less efficient in preventing the expression of thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. It may make it easier for these languages to come through unencumbered. I don't know that word. This interpretation fits with Janet's description of what it was like just after the holotropic session. Stop, please.
Me?
Yeah, you. Where they emerged. She described multiple situations in which the language would just start coming out of her and it would be difficult to contain it. In fact, even when we were working together, Janet would sometimes report that the sensation to speak the language was so strong that it felt like pressure that was building and needed to be released. Of course, theta activity has also been associated with access to the subconscious and non-ordinary states of awareness. Anna Wise, one of the pioneers in the study of brainwaves in relation to meditative states, an author of Awakening the Mind, a guide to harnessing the power of your brainwaves, has described theta as the brainwave linked to our subconscious and consequently our ability to know deep information without using the verbal, logical mind. Was that the whole title?
Yes. Yes.
I don't think so. But it says 2002 on it. Okay. Theta brainwaves are often associated with creativity, visualization, and memory, as well as hypnotic states. In fact, theta is a dominant brainwave pattern of young children and may be part of the reason they're non-defensive, imaginative, and open to a sense of magic in the world. It is not uncommon for young children to have imaginary friends, contact with spirits, and a deep connection with the earth and natural cycles. This typically observed until around the age of 8, which coincides with a shift in brain wave dominance from theta rhythm to an alpha rhythm. Now this is only what Janet's brain was doing at baseline, pointing to some potential tendencies of the brain that might be related to her abilities. We wanted to know what was happening when she was speaking these languages. After the baseline recordings, I asked Janet to begin speaking the languages. With zero hesitation, she opened her mouth and what sounded like words in a foreign language just poured out. I was trying to focus on the EEG, looking for anything that might be of interest, and making sure that the sensors on the EEG cap stayed connected. But to be honest, this was very difficult to do while she was speaking. The language is mesmerizing and draws you in. Having heard Janet give demonstrations many times in front of various groups, the reaction is always the same. People become entranced and often feel that they know what the message is even though they don't understand the language. In many situations, I have seen people start crying when Janet is speaking. Somehow there seems to be truth in the message that transcends a cognitive understanding of what is being said. When I went back later to review the EEG recordings, there were several times when the recording looked very unusual. Rather than the normal clean squiggly lines, I saw huge excursions, giant spikes, and slow wave activity of tremendous power. Now, normally, if I saw something like this, I would assume that there was a bad connection, Maybe one of the electrodes came loose during the session. This would be the obvious interpretation, but didn't seem to hold up in this case. Not only was I monitoring the connections during the entire session, but these strange EEG patterns would come and go during the session, looking normal 1 minute and then jumping off the screen the next. Furthermore, this was not just happening in one electrode, but in several electrodes that were all in the same general vicinity. Having been in the neurofeedback world long enough, I still didn't fully trust these aberrant patterns were real, as I assumed that something was wrong with the electrocap I was using. The next time we met, I made sure to use a different electrocap, one that I had recently tested, and took extra care to make sure the connections were 100% solid. Even with these extra precautions, the same strange patterns showed up. The image shows a screenshot of what I saw. Normally, I look at 19 separate lines of EEG, but to keep it simple... You want more? Okay. Even with these extra precautions, the same strange patterns showed up. The image below shows a screenshot of what I saw. Normally, I look at 19 separate lines of EEG, but to keep it simple, I reducted it to 5. The raw EEG represents by the first, second, and fourth lines in the chart below are what we expect to see. The third and fifth lines are the things that got my attention. And then here's that. I ran this data through another software algorithm called LORADA, which is an acronym for Low Resolution Brain Electromagnetic Tomography. LORADA programs allow us to take EEG data collected from the surface of the head and extrapolate to deeper regions in the brain. Essentially, it takes the information from those 19 electrodes and estimates where the signals are coming from below the surface. In the end, you get a set of images that look kind of like an MRI, helping to localize the areas of the brain most involved in certain EEG patterns. When I applied this to Janet's wild EEG pattern, it highlighted an area in the back right quadrant of the brain called superior parietal lobe. This hotspot is shown in the image below. And then here is the image. All right. This raises some obvious questions. What is the function of the superior parietal lobe, and why is it acting so oddly in this circumstance? Prior to this experiment with Janet, I had not looked in depth at this part of the brain. As soon as I got back to my office, I jumped headfirst into a literature review to understand, bless you, what this might mean. I didn't have to look long before I found a very interesting study conducted by a colleague of mine from the University of Missouri. What are the chances? I was familiar with Brick Johnstone, but I didn't know him well as primary area of study. I didn't know him well as his primary study was pretty different from mine. He was heavily involved in studying traumatic brain injury and the field of rehabilitation psychology, while I was in clinical and counseling psychology, just different enough that our paths seldom cross. In 2008 and again in 2012, Brick studied a group of people with traumatic brain injuries that had decreased functioning in their right parietal lobe, the same general area that was acting up in Janet's study. What they found was that decreased function of this region of the brain was consistently associated with reports of increased spiritual transcendence, as assessed by the core spiritual experiences surveyed in 2000. This questionnaire asked respondents to indicate if they have ever had certain spiritual experiences, including an experience of God's energy or presence, an experience of a great spiritual figure, a miraculous event, an experience of angels or guiding spirits, an experience of communication with someone who has died, and an experience with near death or life after death. People with altered functions of the right parietal lobe tended to endorse more of these items, leading the media to dub this part of the brain the God spot. Studies by other researchers seem to support this idea, finding that the brain tumors in the left and right parietal lobes led to increased reports of self-transcendence. Based on these findings, Brick and a colleague developed a model to explain how this might work. Essentially, the right parietal lobe, we're going to call that RPL, is involved in defining and perceived the self-related thoughts, perception of the body, and autobiographical memory. Basically, understanding the self as the separate and discrete entity that is associated with the definition of me. This region of the brain, in connection with a few others, also seemed to be important in distinguishing the self from others. In fact, if you stimulate the right parietal lobe, but not the left, with transcranial magnetic stimulation, you can interfere with this ability. We also know that increased activity in the RPL leads to tendency to focus on the self, which supports the idea that less activity in the RPL leads to find the focus on the self or selflessness. When you are not focusing on yourself, it is easier to connect something beyond the self, which can be experienced as a mystical or transcendent state. We can write it out like a geometry proof. If the RPL is involved in defining the self, and the normal function of the RPL is disrupted, then it is easier to connect to energies beyond the self. Somehow, Janet was able to temporarily disrupt the functioning of her RPL, presumably allowing her to expand her consciousness in a way that allows other forms of consciousness to speak through her. This sounds crazy as I write, but is the best explanation for what I have observed. In her book Spirits, they are present. Oh my god. In her book Spirits, they are present. Janet describes beginning to see and interact with ghosts at age 5. She also tells numerous stories of premonitions and the ability to know things about other people or events. Clearly, Janet had already had some psychic and mediumship abilities before her holotropic breathwork experience. Despite these natural abilities, there was something about the HB practice that seemed to have created an opening in consciousness, or expanded the crack that was already there. In any case, why would breathing in a deep, rapid manner for an hour cause this to happen? Holotropic breathwork researcher James Eierman suggests that there are two major elements in the HB process that appear to facilitate access to non-ordinary states of consciousness. These include voluntary breathing and music designed to encourage specific emotional and psychological states. Apparently, the neuropsychological events from these two combined practices leads to loosening of the emotional control, integrative states, and bonding experiences. It has been suggested that voluntary overbreathing can cause a significant decrease of blood flow in the brain. This reduced
Milk.
Yeah, I'll get you some milk. My eyes look like the same color as that mushroom.
Dang it. Dang it.
Essentially, by minimalizing the normal function of the brain, aspects of the mind that are restrained are set free. Oh my god, normally restrained are set free. Another theory suggests that overbreathing, hyperventilation in HB stimulates the vagus nerve, leading to a variety of neurochemical changes that may be involved.
Eat all with all
You drink all of it?
milk.
Good. I'm so happy for you. Thank you. Anyways, leading to a variety of neurochemical changes that may be involved in mystical or trance states. The vagus nerve is the 10th cranial nerve connecting to the brain to virtually every other system in the body. You okay? When the vagus nerve is stimulated, it leads to a decrease of sympathetic arousal, the body's stress response, an increase in parasympathetic tone, the body's relaxation response. In addition, this process can also lead to the release of a variety of brain chemicals that influence mood, motivation, and feelings of connection to others. Interestingly, it has also been proposed that certain yogic practices involving breathing and chanting also impact the vagus nerve, leading to improvements in anxiety, depression, insomnia, symptoms of PTSD, as well as expanded states of consciousness. Stanislav Grof created holotropic breathwork after being restricted from using LSD with his psychiatry patients in the late 1700s. Grof saw the healing potential in psychedelic medicines and was looking for a non-pharmaceutical way to induce a similar state of consciousness. In his work with clients, Grof noted that the music in the session seemed to directly impact the tone and quality of the psychedelic experience and could be a way to non-verbally support the client's process. His music playlist would essentially create a journey for the client, guiding the session through various moods. In fact, it was observed that the psychedelic session would generally move through phases that occurred in a predictable sequence, including pre-onset, onset, building towards peak, re-entry, and return. The music was selected to be consistent with these phases. So during the pre-onset phase, the music would be very gentle, quiet, and meditative.
Mama, my toe, Mama.
Your owie?
Yeah,
Aww.
my toe.
Mwah.
Owie,
Is that better?
on my toe.
Owie on your toe?
Yeah.
Okay, let me kiss it again. Mwah. Is that better?
No.
It's not better? What?
What?
Mwah.
My foot there.
Mwah.
Back here, Mama. Oh, there.
Oh, your foot?
Yeah, my foot.
Okay.
My, oh, there.
Mwah.
Dang it.
Mwah. All right.
Not even watching it.
Leave it alone, please. He got an owie on his foot. No, you cannot have juice. You can have water.
You
So thirsty.
Water.
on foot.
Let's see where we at. So during the pre-onset phase, the music would be very gentle, quiet, and meditative. During the peak phase, the music that invokes strong emotional feelings. What?
Arriba, Mama.
Uh-huh. That's right.
No.
Okay.
I already said no. In HB session, in HB sessions, loud, strong driving music is used right at the beginning to help activate the effort involved in over-breathing. More emotionally challenging music is played in the middle of the experience, leading to more soothing, gentle tracks near the end of the session. When used in an intentional way, the music becomes the primary influence in both psychedelic and HB sessions. This idea appears to be supported by the reports of psychedelic assisted therapy patients as well. In a recent study, psychedelic therapy participants were asked to share their impressions of the music used during their session. 17 of the 19 participants reported that their subjective experience during the sessions were intensified by the music. 15 of the 19 subjects reported that the music in some way guided the journey. The same percentage of respondents reported feeling that the music was supportive, helping them feel grounded and reassured. The reality is that music by itself can lead to an altered state of consciousness if used in the right setting with the right intention. It is easy to imagine a scenario in which Janet's right parietal lobe was already primed to experience more subtle aspects of reality. Remember, she began having both spiritual communication and psychic experiences at a very early age. When she engaged in the HB breathing and the blood flow in her brain decreased significantly, it caused the function of the RPL to become even more dysregulated. The boundaries that were typically engaged kept a separate identity from other consciousness. What's up? Oh, really? Keeping a separate identity from other consciousness disappeared, creating space for this new ability. The neurochemical changes that occurred from stimulation of the vagus nerve created a stimulousness, excitation, and a relaxation. The ramping up of serotonin and dopamine added to the psychedelic effects, while the increase of oxytocin increased feelings of connectedness. The music added color to the experience, guiding and expanding and supporting it, perhaps orienting her towards some type of shamanic consciousness. In short, the elements of the HB experience may have provided the perfect storm needed to activate this potential. You mad? Thousands of people, including myself, participate in HB sessions every year without unlocking superpowers. Why is Janet's case so different? Maybe it's not different. Perhaps others have experienced... Don't spit. Babe, get out of here.
Me?
Yes.
No.
We just haven't heard about it. In fact, if Janet had not been so tenacious in seeking answers, and if our paths had not crossed, I would be unaware of any such instances. It does not seem like a stretch to imagine that there are others out there that have also had dramatic impacts. In fact, when I think back to some of my HB experiences, those of friends and colleagues, there are many instances of people reliving parts of their lives, interacting with the memories of deceased loved ones, and encountering archetypical entities, angels, spiritual beings, and gods. My professional training has led me to assume that these experiences were psychological in nature, a type of emotional drama, representing aspects of the mind. It had never occurred to me that perhaps these experiences were real. I wonder how my feelings and perceptions about myself would be different if I had a different interpretation of my experience. Rather than viewing myself as someone who doesn't have this ability, what if I viewed myself as someone who has been able to connect with the spirit world? Would this make it easier to do it again? Would it help open the possibility of developing this ability without HB or other techniques? Before we explore strategies for using breath work to induce an altered state of consciousness, which I will not be doing, it is important to recognize that this approach is not for everyone because it is significantly altering your brain patterns in neurochemistry. These practices are not recommended for anyone who has any sort of neurological instability, such as a history of experiencing delusions or hallucinations, head injury, or seizures. Groff, the creator of HB, has also stated that this practice is contradicted for anyone dealing with a series of cardiovascular disorders such as high blood pressure, aneurysms, history of heart attacks, etc. In general, if you have any significant health concerns and or questions about whether this is an appropriate practice for you, it is best to consult with your physician. Below, I will discuss several breathwork approaches, some of which are gentler than HB. You can also simply work with music to explore altered states. Finally, I think it is important to engage in altered state experiences with an experienced and trustworthy guide because these experiences can lead to surfacing of challenging memories or emotions, and it's best to have a support person with you. And we are not going to be doing this breath work. So I guess that's the end of the chapter.